Slavery was not the exception in human history. Freedom was. That is the part modern people often miss. Before America could wrestle with slavery, it had to emerge from an older world where freedom, as we understand it, barely existed for most people. Most people did not choose their rulers. They did not design their laws. They did not possess equal rights before political power. They lived under kings, empires, lords, local masters, inherited rank. For thousands of years, slavery existed across civilizations, races, religions, and empires. It was not American in origin. It was not uniquely Western. It was one of humanity's oldest institutions. That does not make slavery less evil. It makes the rise of liberty more extraordinary. The colonies were not born from a free world. They were born from a world of hierarchy and dependence. Europe itself had only recently begun moving beyond older systems of feudal obligation, noble privilege, and land-bound labor. Serfs were not chattel slaves, but they were not free in the modern sense either. Many were bound to land, bound to lord, bound to custom, bound to inherited obligation. So the deeper question was not simply why slavery existed in colonial America. The deeper question was how liberty could grow out of a world where unfreedom had been normal, and colonial America inherited many forms of unfreedom. Indentured servants crossed the Atlantic bound by contracts they could not simply walk away from. Some came voluntarily, trading years of labor for passage. Others came under harsher conditions. They were not slaves. Their servitude usually had an end, but they still lived for years under another person's command. Apprentices were bound, tenants were dependent, convicts were transported, households were ordered by authority. This was a world where dependence came in many forms, and into that world came African slavery. The Atlantic slave trade was vast, but even here, the numbers surprised people. Millions were carried across the Atlantic. Most did not go to what became the United States. About 4.8 million were transported to Brazil. About 4.7 million were sent to the Caribbean. At least 388,000 arrived in mainland North America. That does not minimize American slavery. It places it inside the larger Atlantic world. By the time of independence, the 13 colonies held about 2.5 million people. Roughly 500,000 were enslaved. So slavery was real. It was significant. And it was unevenly distributed. Some colonies were deeply shaped by it. Others were less dependent on it. But no region was untouched by the broader Atlantic system. And the early story was more complicated than many modern arguments allow. In 1655, Anthony Johnson, a free black landowner in Virginia, won a court dispute involving John Casor, whom Johnson claimed as bound for life. That one case did not create American slavery by itself, but it does show that early colonial labor was not the simple story people often imagine. Over time, that mixed world hardened. Indentured servitude declined in importance. African slavery expanded. Colonial law began turning status into something inherited, racial, and permanent. That was the hardening of racial chattel slavery, and it became one of the deepest contradictions in colonial life. Most colonists did not own slaves. Many were small farmers, laborers, tradesmen, servants, frontier families, merchants, or town dwellers. But slavery still shaped law, wealth, politics, labor, and regional power, far beyond the number of people who personally owned slaves. That is the balance this story requires. Do not pretend every colonist was a slave owner. Do not pretend slavery barely mattered. Both claims distort the past. The contradiction was most visible in the Cavalier South. There, liberty was tied to land, property, household authority, local rule, and independence from distant power. From the Great House, this looked like freedom. From below, it looked very different. The same world that taught elites to fear distant power also taught them to command everyone beneath them. That was not hypocrisy in the shallow sense. It was a social order built on unequal freedom. Liberty for the few was not just an idea, it was a structure. But this was not only a Southern problem. New England had slavery too. So did New York. So did the Middle Colonies. The scale differed. The dependence differed. The moral pressure differed. But the contradiction crossed geography. The Quakers became one of the places where that contradiction grew hardest to ignore. Not because they were perfect from the beginning, they were not. But a people who believed conscience could not be forced had planted a dangerous question. If conscience matters, what happens to bondage? If all people stand before God, what happens to inherited domination? The critique of slavery did not come from outside the liberty tradition, it grew from inside it. And then came the Declaration. It did not abolish slavery. It did not solve the contradiction overnight, but it changed the ground under the contradiction. We hold these truths to be self-evident, placed American legitimacy on a new foundation. Rights were not gifts from kings. Equality was not permission from Parliament. Consent was not a favor from empire. That language did not end slavery, but it made slavery answerable to a higher standard. The stronger the language of liberty became, the harder slavery became to defend without contradiction. That is why the Declaration created a beachhead. Not the whole victory, not the final battle, a beachhead. And no, they could not simply wave a wand and unwind the entire inherited order in the middle of crisis. They were breaking from the most powerful empire in their world. They were trying to hold rival colonies together. They were trying to survive war. They were trying to become a people. Some defended slavery, some profited from it, some feared what ending it would do to their world. Some already saw the evil more clearly. The failure to end slavery immediately was real, but so was the principle that would eventually be used against it. The Constitution would later become a bundle of compromises. In this series, we have called it a peace treaty among rival American worlds. And like many peace treaties, it contained problems it could not yet solve. But the Declaration had already done something history-changing. It made liberty the standard. It made equality part of American legitimacy. It made consent the test of rightful government. And once those principles were spoken, slavery could never again hide completely behind custom, property, or inherited power. This is the Freedom Contradiction. America inherited slavery from a world where unfreedom was normal. But America also declared principles that made unfreedom impossible to defend forever. That does not erase the contradiction. It explains why the contradiction could not stay buried. The Declaration did not win the war against slavery overnight, but it established the ground from which that war would eventually be fought. Slavery was ancient, liberty was the revolution. And that is why the American story cannot be reduced to guilt or denial. It is the story of a people born inside contradiction, carrying principles powerful enough to challenge the world they inherited. For the fight for liberty never ends. It only changes hands.